Pain Management 4480, welcome to your Thursday class. So I know we've all probably been watching the news and the Weather Channel a lot over this last week, and so just wanted to say that I hope you're all doing well and being safe. Today we are going to finish up chapter 7, which is on international strategy. I have my notes here from the PowerPoint, and let's just go through it quickly. So researchers have identified 4 common strategies that international firms pursue, and they all differ to the extent that they are facing pressures to keep costs low and facing pressures to adapt to the local community that they're entering into. And so that's one issue associated with international expansion, because we have consumers in different parts of the globe all receiving very different incomes. And when you operate an international firm, the question is, how do we serve people who live on very low wages in this country, and then we have these other consumers who have a different standard of living in the more developed countries. And so depending on who you're serving and what you're serving, that will help dictate which strategy you pursue. So the first category of these strategies is just the general international strategy. And so that's when the pressure to lower costs and the pressure to adapt to the local country, the local community, are both low. And here our decision making is centralized in the home office. And so in this increasingly globalized world that we're living in now, pursuing an international strategy is actually really uncommon. It's rare for a company to be able to get away with this, but there are some companies that still are able to, and one example is Kellogg's. So, Kellogg serves breakfast items. We know them specifically for the cereals that we buy, and Kellogg doesn't change much across different countries. Their pricing is not hugely different in the various countries, and their product and the ingredients they put in the product aren't very different either. And so that's just one example of a company saying, here's what we sell, and this is what we're going to sell to everyone, no matter where they are on the globe. So the second strategy we would pursue when we're expanding to other countries is called a global strategy. And this is when the pressure to adapt the product to the local market is low, but the pressure to reduce costs is high. And so in the global strategy, our decisions are centralized in the home office. And since we don't have to, or we're not expected to adapt our product to the local market, we're probably selling something that's pretty standardized. And so a company or an industry that is a good example of the global strategy is the pharmaceutical industry, because we don't adapt the medications that we're selling based on location, right? If someone in the US needs insulin, then the person in, South Korea needs that same insulin, right? Like, we wouldn't need to change the formula or the ingredients for the insulin. But it just depending on where we are selling the item and depending on the typical income in that location, we might face pressures to lower our costs so that our medicines are more accessible to people of different incomes. So a third strategy we could pursue if we are expanding internationally is called the multi-domestic strategy. And here, the pressure for lowering costs is low, but the pressure for local adaptation is high. And because we want to adapt to the local markets that we're selling our products or services to, that means that we're likely to decentralize our decision makings. So we would have offices in these different locations, and we would allow the managers of those various offices to make the best decision for that location. And a good example of a company pursuing a multi-domestic strategy would be Mondelez International. And so Mondelez sells like food and drink products, and they literally changed the name of the product, the ingredients of the product, the taste of the product based on where they're selling it to. So I remember reading an article about how they were selling it to a community where the children there are face like iron deficiencies, and so Mondelez decided to add extra iron to the ingredients for one of the drinks. So they really take into consideration intentionally what this community likes, what this community needs, and then they change their product based on what they've found out through that research. So the fourth strategy we would pursue if we're expanding internationally is called a transnational strategy. And so this is when the pressure to reduce costs is high and the pressure to adapt to the local markets is high. And so in this case, when it comes to decision making, it would either be centralized or decentralized, and the activities that we engage in to produce the product or services would be centralized or decentralized depending on just what's most efficient for the firm. And so this is a tough strategy to face and to pursue, just because you're feeling the pressure on each end. And a good example of a company pursuing this strategy is Panasonic. So Panasonic has been known to open up research centers in the different countries that they serve so that they can do research on what the consumer needs in that space. And then we know that Panasonic is known for its electronics, so then they also have to keep in mind their pricing, right? Because they want to make sure that they are offering something that is attractive and realistic for people at different incomes. So your book starts this conversation on globalization versus regionalization. And so we have this idea that, you know, we're more global than ever, which is true, and we are more in touch with each other in various countries than we've ever been. But the definition of having a global firm is that you have 20% of your sales in each of the three major markets. And so that means 20% of sales in North America, 20% of sales in Europe, and 20% of sales in Asia. Less than 2% of the world's largest firms actually meet that definition. So most firms are not global firms. A lot of firms instead engage in regionalization. And so that's when we're most likely to do business with the firms in countries that are near us, or the firms that are in countries that are like us. So the firms that are in countries that maybe speak our language or have a culture that's similar to us. So firms most likely engage in regionalization versus globalization. So there are various entry modes that we can use when we are choosing to expand into another country. And so we can choose to simply export to that country. So even that's considered international expansion, where we're just sending our product to the other country. We can choose to license our product or franchise. We can engage in a strategic alliance or a joint venture. And then we can also open up a wholly owned subsidiary in another country. Typically, when we are just starting to expand internationally, we want to do the lowest risk expansion method, and so that's exporting. So exporting allows us to sort of dip our toe in the water and see how that goes before we expand even further to ultimately opening up an office in that space. So with this conversation on international expansion, I really wanted us to also think about the fact that a lot of countries or a lot of companies expand into other countries for the purpose of extracting the natural resources of these other countries. And so at the end of your PowerPoint, I include a video about a firm looking to do mining in Peru, and some of the consequences of choosing to mine in this new space. And it's not a new space actually, because people and communities had been living in that space for generations, and this company from another country comes in and they sort of take over the town. And so I wanted you to watch the video and just think about the implications of this sort of international expansion. And so I have forum questions for you based on that video. So that's it for this week, and I hope you have a great weekend and be safe.